Hey guys, I'm the 50s kid. This is an E46 BMW. As you may or may not know, I rebuilt the transmission about 8 months ago at this point, and just recently I've started to hear like a buzzing sound. I believe what it is I used an aftermarket filter when I did that job, and I do recall now reading something from a transmission builder saying that when he would use aftermarket filters, he would get sort of a buzzing sound, a loud sort of noise going on. They would make noise basically. So I've gone and I've purchased an OEM ZF transmission filter, and I'm gonna install that. So I figured I might as well make a video to show you how to change your fluid, because that's basically what I'm gonna be doing. So let's get started. Go ahead and jack your car up. You want to get all four wheels off the ground, so jack it up in front and the back. It's important to get it even and level. You want the transmission to be level for when you refill it. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to refill it with the proper amount of fluid. So you can see we've got a label on the transmission saying that you don't have to change your fluid, you don't have to top it off, it's filled with lifetime fluid. I'm going to tell you right now, don't listen to this. This is a lie. You need to change your transmission fluid about every 60,000 miles. So this brings up the question, should you flush your fluid? Should you change your fluid? Should you change your fluid and your filter? What should you do? Well, you can't actually flush your fluid at home. You need a special machine to do that. Professional shops have them where they disconnect the transmission cooler lines, and they'll suck out all the old fluid, and then they'll pump in as much fluid as they sucked out, as much replacement fluid as they sucked out. And so that's a complete flush. The problem with that is it doesn't actually change your transmission filter. So that's one thing to consider there. Here at home, what you actually can do is you can change your fluid by draining it from the drain pan and then putting replacement fluid back in. You could also remove your drain pan after you drain it and then change your filter, which is what I'm going to recommend you do every time. But in that case, you're only getting a little bit more fluid out that was just sitting in the transmission pan. But in both of those cases, you're actually still leaving a lot of fluid left in the transmission, particularly the torque converter. About half your fluid is going to remain in your torque converter. You're not going to be able to change it using that method. However, there is a way that you could do sort of an at-home flush, and this is how. You can drain your fluid, put new fluid back in, start the car, get the transmission running, get the fluid mixed around, okay? Drain it again, fill it again, and then do it a third time. Just repeat that 3 times, again, starting the car in between each time. In that way, when you change fluid 3 times in that way, you're going to be left with very little of the original fluid still left in the transmission and the torque converter. You're going to be running mostly new fluid at that point. It's going to cost you a little bit more. You're going to waste a little bit of fluid probably in the process of doing this, but at least you've got brand new fluid, completely brand new fluid. So that's one thing to consider. In my particular case, I've already rebuilt my transmission about 8 months ago, so I'm just pulling the pan down in order to change the filter, and I'm going to put new fluid in, and that's it. Last thing I want to mention, there's one case where you might not want to change your fluid at all, and that is if you haven't changed your fluid ever and you actually have a situation where your clutch packs have worn away and all that friction material is now suspended in your fluid. If you go ahead and drain your fluid and put fresh fluid back in, that might lead to a situation where you get some slippage in your clutch packs. And in order to check for that, what I would recommend you do is drain your fluid, just drain a little bit of your fluid at first, put the drain plug back in, and then take a look at your fluid and just see if you've got those metal particles suspended in it. If so, do your best to add the fluid back, or just replace it with a little bit of new fluid. Just a little bit of new fluid probably won't hurt, but that kind of situation is going to be rare. I mean, it's probably going to take like 200,000 miles to get to that point. If you're at 120, I seriously doubt that that's happened. I mean, I rebuilt mine. I had about 170 something thousand miles, and all the clutch packs were fine. I had no reason to worry. So unless you're experiencing problems with your transmission, if you've got slippage, if you've got transmission codes, something or other, then it might be a concern. But if your transmission is otherwise normal, you probably won't have to worry. Anyway, I just want you to be aware of that. So here is the transmission. The rear of the car is this way, front of the car is that way. The fill plug is up here on the back. The drain plug is over here. This is the ZF transmission. There's also a GM transmission. The GM is going to have normal hex bolts, I believe. The ZF actually has Allen bolts in order to get the plugs off. And it's going to be an 8 Allen for the fill plug and a 6 Allen for the drain plug. Before you do anything, it's important to make sure that you can get the fill plug off. You don't want to drain your transmission and find out you can't fill it, because that would be a bad day. So what we're going to do is stick a Allen wrench in there, and we're going to get a wrench to give us more leverage. You just hook it on like that and then crack it. See? There we go. So that one's loose. We know that we can refill the transmission when the time comes. So now we can just go ahead and drain this sucker. And that one wasn't too tight. So make sure you've got your drain pan ready. Make sure you're wearing gloves, all that. Go ahead and drain it. At this point, you can just put your fill plug back in if you wanted to check it. Make sure you don't have any metal particles. That fluid was red when I put it in, and this is just what it looks like after about 6 or 7 months, I believe it's been. Brown is normal. If your fluid's really, really dark black, that's kind of a sign of a problem. Okay, this is good enough. We can get the rest of the fluid out once we take the pan off. Okay, I'm going to proceed to remove the bolts that surround the pan. They're all T27s. I'm going to start with the ones on the side first. I'm going to loosen the ones on the back, but not remove them completely, just the ones back here. And then I'm going to take the ones off from the front. The idea being, I want the pan to come down from this end, because this is where most of the fluid is probably pooled and collected. So I just want it to come down from this end. I don't want it to drop all the way. And then I'll just remove those last few bolts, and then I can just pull it off in a controlled manner. So we're getting there. I've just got the 2 bolts on back here. You can see my pan is loose. Yours might not be loose like this. Probably won't be loose like this. So you might need to pry it a little bit. In my case, I kind of knew that this would happen. You can see that I'm just sort of doing this in a controlled manner. There we go. So there's the rest of the fluid coming. I'm just going to wait for that to finish draining. Then I'll remove the 2 back bolts and get the pan out of here. It's a messy job, guys. Make sure you have paper towels. So I'm going to be actually reusing this gasket. There's nothing wrong with it. I want to draw your attention to this right here. This is actually one of the magnets that is supposed to be on the bottom of the transmission pan, and its job is to collect the metal shavings that come off of the friction discs as the clutch rings slide past them and wear metal off of them. This is actually supposed to be stuck to the pan, but it looks like it has stuck to my filter, so I'll clean it off, toss it in my pan. I'll show you what those look like a little bit later. We'll clean them all off. This filter is supposed to be held on with 2 T40 bolts. One is here. But in my particular case, the person who changed the fluid and filter before me lost one of those bolts and replaced it with just a normal Phillips. So that sucks. But the other bolt is right here. Now, you want to have your pan right under this because a lot more fluid is going to leak out, particularly from the front side once you pull it out. I'll show you that right there. Oh, I'm hiding it there. So yeah, more fluid leaks out of this hole right here. Now, there is something further you can do to get even more fluid out of here. In fact, you can drain about half of the torque converter. If you, I just want to draw your attention to all these bolts right here. There are 2 different size bolts. There's T40s and T27s. If you remove the T40s, that'll actually allow the valve body to pull out of here. Now, what you can do is you can remove all but 2 of the T40s, one in the back and one in the front.
and just leave those on a couple of threads. And what that'll do is that'll let the valve body sort of come down a little bit, and that'll release all the rest of the fluid that's up in the transmission, or at least most of it. All the fluid, like half of the fluid from the torque converter, is going to drain out of there. So you'll be able to change a lot more fluid that way. I'm going to go ahead and cut in a scene from my transmission rebuild video where I filmed that, and I'll just put it right here. And I've also removed all but 2 of the bolts on the valve body. I've just loosened those up like halfway. And you can see the valve body is sort of loose right here, hanging on those 2 bolts, front and back. And that it's loose enough to pull off of those two oil tubes that go into the oil pump. And so it's drained out a ton more fluid that way. This way, all the fluid is mostly drained out of the torque converter, well, at least half of it's drained out anyway. And most of the fluid's drained out of the body. And now I'm going to put everything back up, and when I pull the transmission off and turn it upside down, it's not going to leak a gallon of fluid out of the vent hole, you know? Okay, and that's what that basically looks like. So it's up to you whether you want to do that or not. You can get a little more extra fluid out that way. I am not going to do it. So here we got our new filter. I want you to notice there's a little orange O-ring on the end of the filter where it fits up in here. Make sure that your old one didn't get stuck up in there, because mine did when I went to change it the first time when I did my rebuild. So just make sure yours isn't stuck. And I think what I'm going to do is start this bolt here, this back bolt for the filter, because you can see there's a little slot in there, and that just fits up in there. That way it won't fall while you're getting it all back into place. Let's put a little transmission fluid on that rubber seal. Right, slides up into place easier. There we go. There we go. Made in Germany, ZF. That's the proper one. So as you can see, these are the magnets right here. There are 8 of them. And I'm just going to clean them off. Just get the metal particles off of them. That is basically what the magnets will look like after about 6 or 7 months. They do have metal particles on them already. And that's just the way it goes with transmissions. It's a good idea to clean these off every time you change your fluid, no matter what. Okay, that's what the pan looks like when it's all cleaned out. And I am going to put just a couple of dabs of RTV in 4 corners just to hold the gasket in place, because this gasket is kind of slippery and wants to fight with you. Doesn't want to go back in where it came from. And just a couple of dabs of RTV will help you with that problem. Just like that. A couple of dabs aren't going to hurt anything. There, now I can lift this thing up and the gasket's not going to slide off. Now the big juggling act. We're going to get our pan back on. And I've got a bolt in my hand. Again, that RTV is really going to help. Let's go ahead and get a couple of threads started on this one. And maybe on the other side. It's supposed to be T27. I don't have a T27 screwdriver, but this should work. You don't want to screw it all the way shut. You want to get, have just a little bit of wiggle room. Like that. See, I've got a little wiggle room, so now I can get all the bolts started. Alrighty, I've got all the bolts tightened, torqued down. So now it's time to remove the fill plug, put some oil back in it. Once you've got it somewhat loose, you should be able to get it the rest of the way with your fingers. You're going to need a fluid pump like this in order to get the fluid in there. You can get this at Harbor Freight. The fluid that I'm going to be using is Castrol Transmax Import Multi-Vehicle. On the back, it actually says that it meets the BMW spec, which is LT71141. So as long as your fluid meets that specification, it's okay to use. So the goal here is just to pump fluid in there until you start seeing it drain out. Once we get enough fluid in there and it's draining out, what we're going to do is start the vehicle, then we're going to pump more fluid in there till it drains out again. Then we're going to put the drain bolt, the fill plug back in, then shut off the car. In other words, if you just do this without the car running, you're not going to have enough fluid in there. Once the car is running, it actually sucks up some of the fluid and it starts circulating it within the transmission, and so that is when you want to check the level. And the way you know you have enough fluid is when it's just spilling out, when it's running, when it's cold, or when it's basically when the car hasn't been driven. You don't want to warm the transmission up completely and or go for a drive and then check it, because the level is going to be totally wrong because the fluid expands when it heats up. So that's why it has actual temperatures here. You want to check it between 30 and 50 degrees. That basically means when it's warm. You just want to feel the transmission pan. If it's cool to warm, you're good. If it's hot and you can't touch it, not good. Gotta wait for it to cool down and start again. It's probably going to take 1.5 gallons of fluid to fill this thing back up. I believe that's about what came out of it. And there it is, dripping out. So now it's time to start the car. So I'm going to keep on filling it until we see it drain out. Okay, that was 1 gallon and I think about 1/2. And it looks like I was wrong, so. Okay, we don't need the car to be on anymore. So now we just have to tighten up the bolt. I've got it mostly tight, I just want to torque it here. With the wrench, just go ahead and make it a little tight, and that's all you need. And that's it. We've changed the transmission fluid. So just make sure you have 2 gallons of transmission fluid on hand before you start filling it up, and you should be okay. If you're not a subscriber yet, what are you waiting for? These videos are so cool. Please consider subscribing. I'm the 50s Kid. Thanks a lot for watching.